All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for the final event of today's schedule, the panel of today's speakers. Of course, we started out the day with Cynthia Sue Larson. Then we had Miss Natasha. Don't ask me to say her last name again, because I'm lucky I got it right the first time. Then we had Dr. Charles Labedo here with us. And also Trish Lesage hanging out at the top there. This is really cool with this digiboard. I'm glad we've got this technology right. This is awesome. So first questions up. Does anybody have any questions to start with? While we're waiting on that, then I do have a question. I want to go down the line here. Well, Dr. Charles, I think you stirred up a bit of a hornet's nest today. And it's a hornet's nest that's been stirred up in the community for a while now. And I think it has to do with the academic delineation of terms like false memory. That, of course, was in your presentation. I know you didn't say it. I noticed you stepped really lightly not to say that. But it was on the screen and it was seen. I know it's not your fault. That's the academic terminology, right? And I'm going to ask this tomorrow too, but is there a way we could change that terminology? Is there a better terminology we could come up with that would fill in false memory yet retain the same meaning? You know what I mean? So I'm going to start down here with Natasha. I'm going to actually let you think about that when I come to you last. Natasha, what do you think about that question?
About false memory?
Yeah, rewording that to not such a loaded term.
I would say that, like I mentioned, in my talk, right? I think that the timeline you switch to, I think the program wants to lull you into thinking that you misremembered, right? Its job is to make, kind of fog you up in the brain and make you think like, oh, this is the way it's always been. You must be wrong, right? So, whenever, because the rest of you, I think, have done so much, from a scientific or, very academic perspective, done so much research and accumulated so much data. But my brain doesn't work that way, right? I look at it like, what is this? And will this make any kind of a concrete difference in my life? Right? Like, how can I ground this? Right.
All right, Miss Cynthia.
Would you have another name for it? Other than, you wouldn't call it false memory, would you?
Would I call it false memory? What would I call it? Like false memory being, you're remembering something, but it's not really the way it was.
Governor Abbott, it's not. Is that a false memory? Would you call it a false memory when you remember that he didn't used to be in a wheelchair?
Right. No, I would not. I'd never say it was a false memory. I feel like that is it's almost like you were given a portal or a window into, kind of blips in our reality. So it's actually a true memory. You're actually seeing what really is happening, right?
But how would you state that academically? Though we know it's a true memory, but in comparison to reality, right? How would we state that in a way that's not, aside from false memory? Because, definitively it doesn't match reality, but we know it's not false. We agree with that too, right?
So I would just go the opposite. I think it's the true memory or the most accurate perception of events.
Nice one. Yeah. But academically, I think academics, I love that answer. But I think for academics, I think they're going to need something like alternate memories. That's what I would go with. And just recognizing the possibility that we don't want to lead the witness. We don't want to swing the jury. We don't want to be that sort of pivotal in directing attention. And if we say false, we're automatically guiding everyone to assume that we're dealing with the cause and we're saying we think we know what's going on. So that's not scientific. I would remove that word false in the interest of true science and bring in a word like alternate memories.
Alternate memory, I like that. Would you like to speak on this, Shane, specifically? I know.
I was going to offer a suggestion of unverifiable memory.
Unverifiable memory.
That would land a little bit better for me. It would anyway than false memory. You know.
Well, but
If you can't verify it with the history that you can actually look up, then.
But when you've got residue and you've got verification, and there's starting to be increasing ways to back it up, then maybe you can't even call it unverifiable.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. If you have residue, says the audience, that would make it a verifiable memory.
Exactly.
So I will give you that. So we need to come up with an even better term. Thought we had them. So moving on, Trish, I'm sorry. Having Trish and Natasha in the same one is going to mess me up, folks. You were ready for a fun show. Trish, what do you think? Is there a term we could come up with? Cynthia says alternate memory, and that's not a bad one, I'd say. Is there something you would come up with aside from false memory?
It's interesting that we're talking about this because not even a week ago, a gentleman approached me on Instagram, and he criticized me for a video I put out there about parallel universes. And we got into a conversation via messaging on Instagram. And I told him that I was actually interviewed on a radio show years ago, and we somehow got speaking about the serial killer, Ted Bundy, on that radio show for some reason. And I told the radio show host that the younger listeners on the show won't even know who he is because that happened back in the 70s. Now, a couple days later, the radio show host posted that interview on her website, and I listened back to it, and there was no mention of Ted Bundy anywhere on that radio show. So I heard myself, my voice, mentioning Jeffrey Dahmer and not Ted Bundy, the other serial killer. So I told this gentleman on Instagram, because he was a total skeptic. He did not believe in Mandela effects nor parallel universes, none of it. And I had been going round and round and round with him on Instagram. And so I told him this story of hearing myself, a recording of myself on a radio show saying things that I had never said, mentioning Jeffrey Dahmer, when I know in fact that I mentioned Ted Bundy. And this recording was online a couple days after I did the interview, and it was at a time years ago when there was no AI, artificial intelligent voice, technology. And so he told me, well, I just still don't believe you. You're just it's a false memory. You are having a false memory. So what you're talking about here reminds me of what just happened to me not even a week ago about someone accusing me of having a false memory related to a Mandela effect and a parallel universe effect situation that I experienced years ago. So I think for me, I would probably steer away from like the false memory terminology. And I like Cynthia's terminology, actually, the alternate memory, because it coincides to me with the fact that some of these realities, they're alternate realities, and there are alternate histories in these alternate realities. And so the alternate memories kind of fits well to me.
All right, Trish, and to Charles, to Charles, I guess he did his credit. That's the word I'm looking for. Come on, brain, we're almost done. To Charles' credit, he did use alternate memories throughout his whole presentation. That was exactly how he referenced them. So that was the terminology used by him specifically. But Dr. Charles, do you have, aside from alternate memories, and alternate memories is fine answer, do you have another idea that you would suggest, or would you go with alternate memories still?
No, I think she hit the nail on the head with alternate memory. It seems like it just works, it just feels right. I mean, you could do other things like alternative recall or collective memory anomaly, but I think when it comes down to it, alternative recall or alternative memory does really fit the bill.
I got to say, for academic terms, I like collective memory anomaly. I got to say, I think we're kind of in agreement on that one. Okay, I think we're in agreement on that one. That's 50-50. All right, so we've got that question out. Thank you so much, Doctor, and everybody, for that answer. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Just a quick thought on that, and I'll just float this out there. I think alternate shared memory is something that's very powerful, and I think that's why we're all here at this conference in the same room, is that it's not just one person. Yeah, alternate memory can maybe be alienating to the one person having a memory, but it's not just one person. It's thousands of people together having this shared memory experience. So
I would agree with that. I'd say that's fair. I think the audience is in more agreement than anyone. Would you guys like to comment on that, or?
Yeah, I like that. That sounds good to me. It brings in that shared concept that this could be a collective phenomenon. We notice, of course, that we get personal Mandela effects, and we also get collective ones. And I think that showed up even in Dr. Labaido's research. I've certainly seen it in the surveys that I've done and the information I've been tracking for 25 years studying this. So I think including both is good. So that's why, for me, alternate is fine. But if you say collective or shared, then you're back on track with the groups and that whole idea of the Wigner bubbles that I was talking about today, which is very scientific. So thank you.
Trish or Charles, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's perfect, the alternate shared memories, because that way it doesn't sound like it's just one person with these alternate memories. I think it lends some credibility and validity to it. So I think that's perfect.
Doctor, would you like to say anything?
Oh, sure, I would agree with that. Yes, definitely.
Excellent. Natasha, would you like to? Okay, you starting to say something then.
That's okay. No. I just want to say I totally like that. I really like that title. It lands well right in my gut. And,
So
yeah,
there we go. Alternative shared memories, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. To the community there. All right. Next up, Lee. You got a question, sir?
Yes, I do, and I love that the shared memories. That's awesome. I like it. That is awesome. I think that's the great way to do it. It makes it sound so great, so much more positive.
Accurate,
yeah, accurate and positive in a sense too. But no, my question is, especially for actually everybody, it is. My question is, do you think, actually, and with the studies that Doctor had, do you think that the Mandela effect affects more religious people than spiritual? Because that is a big question too for me. Because for me, I guess I think that way, but I don't think that way. But I'm also one that will never think that way, I guess, because I don't know.
So said I don't and I won't.
I don't, I don't work, but I am curious especially about his doctor's studies, because I saw a lot of, it was all different religions and that one that didn't have a religion, which, was kind of odd to me. But, it makes me wonder, does religion itself or the belief or faith or whatever we have, that's the best way to put it, have effect or has any effect on us or the Mandela effect? Or
does it play a part in whether or not we
see it or not? Yeah, that's basically what it says.
So is this directed at the panel, all of them?
All of them. All of them. Because I think it goes all the way, because I think everybody has their own reason of belief and faith.
Because I was fascinated by that myself, the numbers that came out. So we'll start at the end, Natasha.
Yeah, I would say that Dr. Charles would probably be, because I've seen.
That's what has to make sure it's a panel question.
Yeah.
It was from his, but it also directs to everybody else, because I think it also can roll off to see from Doc how he feels too as well. It's kind of that freestyle moment of my saying, my little
the people in my life that I know that are very religious or, aligned with certain beliefs, I do not see them communicating any kind of Mandela effect experiences at all, in my experience, right? and I haven't asked them, we haven't had that conversation, but usually I get kind of like that sort of a, oh, you're woo-woo, yeah. I don't get like a lot of receptivity to it, but I saw in Dr. Charles's presentation that he actually has stats. So
I had a slide on that today too. It was in remember I talked about who are we that are Mandela affected, and I talked about 3 different surveys.
The 67.
And I talked about the work of Dr. Taryn Lupo with his 27,000 viewers doing a survey. And what they were asked is to find out, did diet make a difference? It did not statistically significantly. There were many other factors. One of them was the slide on spirituality versus religion. Yes, people who are spiritual but not religious are the majority of that group. And then the primary factors and all the work of him, and then the survey that I did with about 400 or 500 people, looking at people who are Mandela affected, and then taking the Myers-Briggs interest inventory. That was the intuitive feelers or empaths. So that would be the number one similarity that we all have. Dr. Taryn Lupo noticed 86% of the affected definitely self-identify as empaths. And that we saw that with Dr. Bernard Beitman's research with meaningful coincidences. He often writes for Psychology Today. He's written a number of papers. And so we've got 3 different cross references, at least with the intuitive feeler empath.
And that's why I asked
that was like the number one thing. The number 2 was resistance to authority. And so what we see there, it's really interesting. It showed up in Dr. Taryn Lupo's work with the 27,000 people that were interviewed. And this is in my book, The Mandela Effect and Its Society. So you can find it there. But totally that was revelatory, because right there we're starting to see that resistance to authority would not be your religious, but it would be your spiritual. And then the third factor would be that self-referential ability where people are. And Dr. Charles Labaito's work showed that up too. It appeared in that. So we're seeing some excellent preliminary results from what Dr. Labaito is presenting, and I'm excited
That's
to
what
see
keeps
more.
my curiosity about this,
Yeah.
this between it all. And I like to, that's why
I love that.
Yeah.
That's why in my talk I was mentioning the 3 studies I'm aware of, and I think that's a key factor going forward, is to look at what are the shared qualities and attributes of those of us who experience the phenomenon.
I agree totally.
We should ask these 2.
And Trish, go ahead and unmute. You'll be up next. Do you think religion plays a part in whether or not one is able to see the Mandela effect?
I think the Mandela effect could happen to anybody from any background, whether it be religious, spiritual, all ages, all cultural or ethnic groups or anything. But I think that, maybe some or maybe quite a few religions might see this sort of a thing as taboo, I'm thinking. And I'm also thinking that, when people are on more of a spiritual path rather than a religious path, they seem to be more open-minded to experience, to being more intuitive and having otherworldly type experiences. And so it almost seems like when people are more open-minded to it, they tend to have more of these experiences too. And so therefore, I think that, people that are on a religious path that probably do have these experiences, but they might sweep it under the rug. They might not discuss it with anybody. Maybe it's seen as taboo or of the devil or whatever, And I think that it's just that all of us in a more spiritual or metaphysical community talk about these things openly, and we share them, and we're kind of like almost like adventure seekers in a way, because it seems like a lot of people that I've met on the path, they're like, well, how can I experience this? And, it seems like people are more eager to experience these things when they're on a spiritual or metaphysical path. And so I don't think it's a question of, I think everybody could experience it, though.
I love how this question is broken down into 2 different categories now, the spiritual and the religious. So, Dr. Charles, I'm going to ask you a dual question now, because the question has advanced since it began. Do you think religion and or spirituality play a role in the ability to see the Mandela effect?
That's a great question, but even with Trish said, I think spirituality and religion, it does, it can affect people who have Mandela effects, but also, even if someone was non-religious, it seems like can equally experience the Mandela effect. Now, I just think that religion versus non-religion, I think the experience itself might mean something different to that individual. Whereas someone who's non-religious might see it as something that has to do with science, maybe with the universe and something on the quantum level, or some kind of like simulation, or some kind of other aspirations. And maybe those who are religious might think that it has something to do with esotericism and something to do with them being good or bad, or something to that nature. But great question, yeah. But it remains to be seen.
Oh, I appreciate it because I think it's very interesting, especially in my line of work. Teaching in psychedelic shamanry. It's really weird because I disobey authority. I go against grace, and it's nice to see that even religion doesn't have to play a role as waking up to seeing these kind of changes in these quantum fields changing in our real life. So that's awesome. That's cool. Thank you.
And I think I think you're right. I think the explanation per person would vary pending their belief system, whether they're Christian. To Christian, it's the devil. To somebody else, it's the universe, right? So I think you're right on with that too. We have another person that's been waiting very, very patiently. He had a question earlier, and it was saving it for the entire panel. So come on up.
Hi, Dr. Charles. The question I'm going to ask second, and it relates to what we were just talking about before with realities and alternate realities. And I may have read your slide wrong, but in the very beginning, you gave the definition of the Mandela effect, and it said something to the effect of a memory recalled that wasn't consistent with reality, which that triggered me. And that's why I asked you, what's your bias? Because I don't like that definition. Maybe we can fix that a little bit, but that really triggered me. And then everything else, it was kind of hard to really focus on what you had to say because I got triggered. So I don't know if that happened to anybody else, and the question I answered before was, do you have a bias? What camp are you in? What's your experience with Mandela? And for that matter, how did it bring you to get into this research?
That's a fair point, and you bring a valid argument to it. But for me personally, I just think it's very interesting how a lot of people remember something from their past one way, and then all of a sudden it's not like that today. And I lead towards the opinion that it is a true thing, and for my personal bias and opinion, that it exists, and there could be time slippage, something to do with previous, reality, and the only thing I could really think of on like a fundamental point of view is maybe like in CERN when they turned it on in 2009 to 2010 or like 2008 when they're around that time period. Maybe they're colliding particles and maybe something happened and, change within our atmosphere. We just don't know, but how they discovered the Higgs boson, and now, they're, putting things together like leptons and quarks, and they're really, scientists are really, now you get into conspiracy theories, but they're really messing with something on a fundamental level. And this is the only thing I could really deduct that, is making us have these false memories, because it seems like if you grew up in like the 80s and 90s and you remember certain things that you're almost 100% positive, like Kit Kat wrappers, like I remember the hyphen when I was a kid because that was my favorite candy bar. If you grew up in the 80s, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, not this neighborhood. And these are things that, like, when I've talked to people and experienced myself, I may have mentioned the one earlier about the Forrest Gump one. That really is the one that hooked me, hook, line, and sinker. So there has to be some kind of reason why we're experiencing these things, because a lot of people are feeling the same way. And I don't think it's like telephone, because there's two people who not even met and lived in the same area, but they remember the exact same memory. And I just think that's fascinating, and it's got to be some kind of truth to it.
Does that answer your question, my friend? Excellent. So the last panel, and I'm going to try to ask this every panel, starting with Natasha. There is no right answer, of course, to this question. It's the $1 million question. In your opinion, what's causing the Mandela effect?
What is causing the Mandela effect? Well, from my perspective, right, many of you here have been Mandela effect experiencers, right? People have expressed, like, as a child, I saw it, right? And that was not the case with me, right? I did not experience it really until I had the shared experience with my partner, with Tim, and then I couldn't deny it, right? So I would say that something is shifting and there's like more timelines. They're doing something funky. Somebody's pushing the buttons behind the scenes. I don't know exactly, but I feel its intensity increasing, right? I feel the
I would agree
intensity
with that.
increasing. So if people like me that, we're kind of like, like until I met Cynthia, I really was not aware of what's happening, right? But are seeing it and now are like, yeah, I'm pretty sold on it.
Right.
Then there's going to be other people that are sort of waking up to this too and noticing it or can't deny it any longer.
I agree with that. So you think it may be the multiverse, the multi-dimension concept? You mentioned that a second ago.
Yeah, I see it when I do readings, because I see there's certain very, interesting fortune tellers like Madame de Lenormand, right? And she was able to foresee people's fortunes like 10, 20, 30 years in advance. And this to me was really curious because she was remarkably accurate. She died a very wealthy woman. She was Josephine de Bonaparte's exclusive fortune teller. And I always thought, well, how did this woman, I'm having a hard time, seeing what people are going to do next week sometimes, right? And then I realized because the timelines were slow, there was like a different, like time was different. There was a different quality to the planet. And maybe people had less options in life, there was less light available to our brains. But now there's like a quickening, and I see it more and more, not in, when I'm here hanging out with people, but when I'm doing readings for someone, I'll just see like, I see the flips and sometimes I just see fog. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. There's another shift coming and it might go wonky. I don't know. That's kind of
that makes absolute sense. Absolute sense. I was actually following what you were saying. That's why I was making those faces. Yes, ma'am. I was definitely following what you were saying. But that makes sense. If you're coming upon a shift point, not knowing which way it's going to go, that would make sense.
Right. Like there's like, slow, and suddenly it's like, brrr,
because the waveform's not collapsed yet. Right. Cynthia, of course, you and I have had this conversation 1 million times, and of course, there's no right answer, but what could be causing the Mandela effect?
Well, if you're going for a simple answer, I'd say it's consciousness. That's who we are. That's what reality is. And so I'm right there with Max Planck and the others that I mentioned today. Also, it fits in with what Natasha just said regarding this evolution of consciousness, that we're evolving. This might be the first time that humans are part of the process of evolution, which is what Christopher was saying. And, we've heard that from our speakers so far. I would agree with that. So it looks to me very clearly like we are part of this evolutionary process. For the first time, we're being invited to participate at a level that I don't think we've ever participated before. And if you recognize that life is like a waking dream and it can change so that the Simpsons can predict the Higgs boson before we had all that information.
Right.
And stuff like that's going on. It's not just the Simpsons, but going back to the early 1900s, Mary Rose Barrington was talking about this same exact thing. So we can say, oh, it's feeling a broom and it started in such and such a year. But no, let's give credit to where credit's due. And this phenomenon goes way back. It's not just starting recently. It's been around a long time. And so I agree with what Natasha's saying. We're seeing a quickening. We're seeing consciousness. Things are speeding up. The government can't predict things. The weather's going wacky. But at the same time, those of us who see a hurricane in progress, Helene caught us off guard, but we could work with Milton. We're starting to witness firsthand that we have this kind of mind-matter interaction. We're seeing results from Institute of Noetic Sciences, such as I presented today. So therefore, to me, it's clear as a bell. It's consciousness.
So the ontological model, I think they call it.
Well, it's kind of like what Chris was saying. It's beyond space time. We're so fixated on materialism, and it's time to evolve beyond that. So we are beyond that. So is reality.
See, I'm kind of with you on that as a personal level. I think it is consciousness as the base of everything. But I've already said my part last conference, so I won't be in this panel, ladies and gentlemen, to say my panel. Trish, go ahead and unmute for me. The $1 million question, in your opinion, ma'am, what's causing the Mandela effect?
Well, I know, for me personally, looking back at my life, I could feel, energies and things at a very young age, as young as like 2 years old. It didn't happen very often throughout my life, but looking back, there were some moments in which I was experiencing energies or paranormal experiences or whatever. But I think for me personally, the crucial point was when I started to go through a profound spiritual awakening, and I woke up because things were happening. I just didn't notice them before. And once I started to awaken, oh my goodness, it opened up like a big can of worms. It's like I started noticing everything, paying attention to the little details, documenting things, writing them down. And it seemed like the more I paid attention, the more wacky my life became. So I think that it's what the others have said too. Consciousness is changing. People are starting to awaken. People are starting to go to a whole new level of consciousness. And people are becoming more aware, like, why is this happening? And the more aware we become, the more we notice these things. And I just think that could be, like Cynthia said, they've been around. People probably just didn't notice as much or notice at all. But since people are awakening, I think now, we're noticing these things at a much bigger level than what people noticed them before.
That tracks. So the fact that you're able to see it or seeing it makes it more able to be seen. Is that?
I think, if you're open to it and you're paying more attention, the more you notice and the more seems to happen. That's what my personal experience has been. The more I pay attention, the more that things seem to happen. And for me personally, if the day goes by when something like this doesn't happen, that's an unusual day. And that's how my life is. It is unusual when nothing happens. So
It becomes unusual to not be unusual, right?
So if you want to really experience these things, pay attention and then they will.
So that actually tracks with what I've heard a lot of people in the community say, and a lot of people here shaking their heads and making agreeing sounds. That tends to be the case. The more you're open to seeing it, the more you're able to see it. All right, I appreciate that, Trish. And Dr. Lebedo, Trish, go ahead and mute up if you haven't already.
Okay.
Doctor, so I've always wanted to do that, sorry. Doctor, what do you think is causing the Mandela effect? You've done some research, and you had a really good research here. Did you happen to find that answer in your research?
I have not, unfortunately, but I think the strongest case we can go on, I like what Cynthia said, something to do with the mind maybe, how maybe our minds could, change reality. And this might, I think, is something on a quantum level, which would probably speak to Chris's work. But I know there was some work done by Sir Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Dr. Stuart Hameroff. It's called the ORCHOR theory, or orchestrated reduction theory, where the consciousness has quantum properties. And so I think that's an interesting avenue to research and go upon. So basically what that means is our mind, or consciousness, our brain is not really like a machine, but sort of like a transistor for like our thought and consciousness, or our soul. And so basically there's microtubulars in there, tubulin A and tubulin B. There's been studies that when you apply anesthesia, these vibrations stop, and then therefore your consciousness is gone. and then when you release it, it'll come back, so that's fascinating. So there's some avenues of research we could do there, but I think the mind and the quantum level has to give some kind of evidence, or as our strongest lead, I believe, to finding out what's really going on.
I appreciate that, Doc. That's actually a really brilliant answer. I like that. You may be very spot on with a lot of it. Do we have any more questions? Chris, one more question. And then I got one more question, and we'll probably close it out after that unless we have some more.
Yeah, this is actually a comment for Natasha. So at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about Governor Abbott, which is really interesting because I remember back in early 2021, him giving a press conference because the electric power grid had failed in Texas. And I remember him standing at a podium. I remember there were other guys that were next to him at the same level. I just checked on my phone for that press conference, and now he's sitting at a table, and then everyone's standing up next to him. And I'm like, that's not the way I remember that.
Right?
Exactly. And I guess he's on his third term as governor of Texas.
Yeah, I think so.
Until 2027. I don't know how long the term limits are in Texas, but obviously they're a long time. And the whole concept too about how that injury randomly happened with an oak tree falling on him while he was jogging. It seems like there's more at play with that going on.
I am so in agreement with that. I keep rereading that, and I'm like, is somebody, punking me? I think like Liz said the other day. Like, this is super weird.
Yeah, so you wonder if there are any forces that maybe wanted to limit him or limit him as being governor or whatever the case is. I don't know.
It could be a story for the public. It could be the forces. It could be just somebody who's messing with our timelines, kind of saying, well, these guys will believe anything. Let's just...
Exactly. So when you were going through that, I just wanted to give you support that I'm someone that remembers him walking around.
I really appreciate that, because I really do sometimes think, and am I just making this up, right? Like, you go through that and
exactly.
And I feel like we all have so much going on. There's so much complexity in our lives and so much we're juggling, right? And I almost feel like if they start doing this timeline thing on me all the time, I'm going to go nutty, right? Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
So I can also agree with Chris on this one. I didn't know he was in a wheelchair, didn't recognize him in a wheelchair until a previous president visited, and they were walking together, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. that who is that? And someone said, oh, that's the governor. No, the guy in the wheelchair. Oh, that's the governor. What? So yeah, I had a similar experience to that when I first found out too.
So grateful for you guys and you.
So I do have another question. We've got a lot of scientific minds here on this panel today, and I absolutely love that. As you guys know, I got a soft spot in my heart for the science side of it. Could you, and this is on the spot, so I do apologize. I don't expect a academic answer, but what other kind of research should or could be done into the Mandela effect that would further the whole finding an answer, if you will? Everybody. Cynthia Sewell Larson, she said that there's the research right there and right here. Right.
Yeah. We got a great suggestion at this conference, and I want to credit Sharon Squires, who I hope it's okay to mention your name. Yeah. Just want to give credit where credit's due, because she was suggesting it would be great at a future conference of ours to have an international experiment where we're actually choosing what we want to influence. It could be anything that we want to choose. This is the right forum to start that conversation rolling. We could even bring it up in our monthly live streams.
Right.
And then when we get to our next live conference, have a certain moment when around the world at the same time, we're working together to influence whatever it is that we're choosing to influence.
I think that's a brilliant idea. Yeah. Absolutely. So that would be an excellent experiment. I would actually request Mr. Squires be a part of that. But yeah, I think we would all love to be a part of something like that. I think that would be amazing. And it's something we could actually test and denote in the real world. Hey, it went this way. It's not just a coincidence. We were focusing on it going that way.
We've got a year to think about what would that one, well, not a whole year, but we've got some months to figure out what kind of thing do we want to influence. Do we want to like the experiment that I was mentioning, that was specifically working with one person with an interferometer. That's what I was doing
Right.
with the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And then the work that Dr. Libido is mentioning, that would be ORC-OR with Stuart Hameroff and Dr. Roger Penrose. And I've interviewed Dr. Stuart Hameroff, and he came through Berkeley. He came to our conference, Foundations of Mind. And so something aligned with their work might be of interest. I don't know if they'd want to do a collaborative study. I know Dr. Dean Radin at IONS, maybe that we could talk to him. And, there could be a collaborative effort here. So,
Like that.
yeah, there's lots of ideas here.
How about yourself? Do you have any experimental suggestions? If not, no is a valid answer.
I love what Cynthia's saying about this. 100%. And because I really feel like, okay, so how can we shift from this is happening to us and we're constantly just amazed and freaked out to harnessing that energy, using the consciousness as a collective and saying, okay, we don't want to experience this anymore, but we're going to choose this. So if you can let me know when that progress or that experiment is in progress, I'm so in.
Okay, and thank you very much, Natasha. I appreciate that answer. Miss Trish, go ahead and unmute for me. Could you think of some type of research that would forward the Mandela Effect research?
So, I don't have a quantum physics background, but I have a background in hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And back before I became certified, to make a long story short, I learned hypnosis at first because it was so expensive to go to school years ago for hypnosis. And so my friend had the money to go. So she loaned me her materials. And that's how I learned hypnosis at first. So I never at first hung up a sign on the door to the public and told everybody, hey, I'm offering hypnosis, because I thought, okay, I didn't officially go to, graduate from school. I can't probably get insured, so I don't really want to go down that route. Now I have gotten certified and everything. But back in those days before I got certified, I used hypnosis, and I used my own self as a guinea pig pretty much to experience a lot. From astral travel to experiencing different timelines to all sorts of things. And what I found, and it relates to that story that I gave to everybody about using visualization of the flowers for healing. And then all of a sudden I'm seeing flowers in my real everyday life everywhere after I visualized, flowers out in my grandfather's field. It is very interesting to me how even, in a state of hypnosis, and even in a waking conscious state, we can do things and they influence the actual physical world that we live in. I mean, I've had situations in which my uncle was in the hospital 4 hours away from me, and I couldn't go visit him. So I did some hypnosis trying to astral travel to visit him in a hospital. And even though I saw everything in the opposite case scenario, he was there in the 80s instead of the present day. He was at the hospital instead of being, at home and all of that. When I got out of the hypnosis session, my bedroom smelled like a hospital, as if, I could actually smell the hospital in my bedroom. And I've used hypnosis one time during a session. I was doing a past life regression, and I helped these people, these little kids. I gave them money because they were starving and begging for money. I gave them money. I watched in this past life regression as they took the money I gave them, and they went and bought some loaves of bread. Well, I kid you not, a couple days later, my fiance's son came and gave me a couple of loaves of French bread. So it's kind of like I gave somebody money to buy bread when they were going hungry while I was doing past life regression. Now someone's coming to my house and out of the blue just giving me a couple of loaves of French bread. What are the coincidences? So it seems to me that, working with the mind, even on this level of using hypnosis or trance or whatever, is very fascinating because it can influence our world, our physical world. And I've used myself as a guinea pig experimenting and doing research that way. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to go out and experiment on somebody else in that way, but, research in that way, how in the world, can our consciousness influence the world on a waking conscious level and even in trance or using hypnosis and other methods.
As a matter of fact, I think tomorrow we may hear some of those experiments that have been done using this very method and the information that has come out of that. So I think that experiment has actually already been put into place, but I do love the concept. As a matter of fact, there's some information I hope comes out tomorrow from that talk that's going to fascinate everyone in this room if you're not aware of it already. So Dr. Charles, the research master next to the research master, Miss Cynthia here. So let me ask you, what other kind of experiment would you design now furthering the research for the Mandela effect?
That's a great question. I like what Trish was talking about with hypnosis, and there's still a lot that we don't really know about it, in the realm of like the mind and with parapsychology. And so that's definitely something that we could definitely dive into. I'd like to see more researchers do look into that because the mind is a powerful thing, and I just don't think we know enough about it to, make it, a powerful assessment. But I think some good research. Well, what's fashionable lately is the whole idea with like simulated realities and simulated universes. Nick Bostrom, the philosopher, wrote that famous paper. We have now Elon Musk, who's talking about it, how it's a possibility. But I think when we say simulated, universe, I don't think I think people think like AI and like machines. But what's not to say maybe life and biologics can create a simulation and, with carbon. Do we have any proof? I think there's something we can go and research. I would say dreams. When we go to sleep at night, right, we have dreams. And in our dreams, we could be flying, climbing tall buildings, all kinds of things. Seeing loved ones. And then when we wake up, we're back into like supposedly the real world. So that's a perfect example of a living entity creating an artificial simulation. If you want to, postulate that dreams, are not reality, don't exist. They could be other realities, but so maybe something to do with dreams or like the hypnosis or anything to do with simulated realities or artificial universes. I think there's something there. There's some gold there, and I think we'd find something. And anything, it'd be fun and creative at best.
I fully agree with that. Well, there we go. For those listening at home that want to be involved in some type of experiment, there's a couple ideas to carry the research on, and we'd love to find out what you find out yourselves. And do we have any more questions for the panel? Any questions at all? Going once, twice. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel for day 2 of the 2024 International Mandela Effect Conference. Miss Trish Lesage, keep your hands going. Mr. Charles Labedo, Miss Cynthia Sue Larson, and Miss Natasha S.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.